like a T-Rex would be really easy to take down from the air. They're so big. You could just take a helicopter and go pew pew pew.
That's how you shoot from helicopters.
Pew pew pew.
For posterity's sake, to those watching this as an actual video, this is our Patreon live stream. Our patrons this month chose Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, a 32-year-old book at this point, but obviously one with a huge popular appeal, and I think all of us have watched the movie pretty much. Everybody at least has watched one of the 19 movies.
I think Ice Willow hasn't.
There was somebody in our Discord hadn't, but most people have in terms of like you at least know the ideas, and that's one of the things that's interesting I found about the book as I was reading it. Because this is actually my second time reading it. I read it back when I was like 14. It was just constantly in my mind contrasting with the movie and how dinosaurs are thought of now versus then. So like the book at certain points makes it very clear that like, oh, people think dinosaurs are really slow, but they're not, and this is a new thing. I really liked the book. Rereading it again, though, I understand why the movie cut some stuff that I'm like, okay, yeah, that was smart to cut. But what were your general impressions? Because this is your first time reading it.
It is my first time reading it. So I really enjoyed this. I didn't used to be as big of a sci-fi person as I am now. And Will and I were talking about how one of the things in this book is there's a lot of extensive, just dry sci-fi science spewing at you. And I don't know why, but something happened after I read the 3-Body Problem series where like, I now find that kind of magical, and I can like just sit and have it wash over me. And I have the benefit, I was saying this to Will before we started, where like, if you know too much about something, it's really hard to experience like the magic with it. So I was using the example of a historical costumer that I follow. She said that once she got a lot of historical knowledge, she wasn't able to tap into the magic of going to Renaissance and medieval festivals because she just sees the anachronisms and it throws her out of it. Or watching historical movies or historical shows, she knows so much that she can't just like enjoy it because she just sees the things that are wrong. And when it comes to science, I have none of that knowledge. So I get all the magic pleasure and none of the science, like none of the pain of being like, well, that doesn't make sense. And it's funny because for something to make me go, well, that's not real or possible, it has to be so bad.
And that is not Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton is serious about research and knowing his stuff.
Ooh, Max said, I loved the science piece. I give Jurassic Park up as an example of a sci-fi horror book. Weirdly enough, it was less horror for me than sci-fi. It was a little bit in the beginning, but it was like sci-fi, almost action-adventure thriller. Like it was less of that dooming, terrifying existential horror than it just was like, oh my god, it's a velociraptor, run! Or like, don't run, stop moving, they can see you when they move.
Yeah, it's more science thriller in terms of his work as a whole. And because I've actually read a lot of Michael Crichton. I read this one, I read Jurassic, or The Lost World, I've read in Sphere, Timeline.
He actually owns a book.
I was actually going to have us read this at some point, because if we're going to read one Michael Crichton, that one's my favorite. Even though the movie is trash. But it's very distinctive how Michael Crichton writes. He has this very laconic style when it comes to characters, and then a non-laconic style when it comes to talking about different science. I think it works, but you also have to be along for the ride.
Ice Willow said, I really liked the book. I came out of it not scared of the dinos at all, though. And Max said, could be because of the overexposure to the real CGI dinos now. For me, I also had a little bit of that. By the time we got to the like ending scene, I really wasn't as terrified. And part of it is by the time you get to the end, there's just been so many dinosaur attacks. And like, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I was pretty like, my hair is doing weird things.
Yeah, I think you need to join me in the messy hair movement.
No, thank you.
I don't think you have a choice.
I was pretty like that thriller vibe still had me throughout it, but there was like I have feelings about.
Hold on. Shelby said, off topic for this one, but I love Timeline too. The book. The movie is the best. Kind of trash though, so I love it for other reasons. The movie is not the best. The movie is not very good, except for Gerard Butler, who is epic in everything he does. I'm kidding. The movie is like, the thing is, the Jurassic Park movie is really good. In certain ways, It's better than the book. And I didn't want this review to turn into just this is how they did it in the book versus the movie, but we'll actually end up talking about that a lot because it's a thing. But the Timeline movie is actually kind of a good contrast in terms of adaptation that just kind of slightly dumbs down everything and makes it not quite as good. So I forgive you, Shelby.
I'm sure, Shelby, you needed to be forgiven.
Ice Willow says, I think it's because he does a good job of making the dinos seem like just like any other animal. I think that's true. I think also the thing is that, like Max was saying a second ago, like this is 32 years old. There's a point where like we're just used to the Jurassic Park version of dinosaurs being dinosaurs in terms of the standard, that at this point it's hard for us to really go back into the mindset of what 1990 when this was published was like,
and what the knowledge of dinosaurs were like. But Icewell made a point, like tigers are dangerous, but they aren't scary. You could make them scary if you were like locked in a room with one, which is what. But I think you're right, Icewellow. There really becomes a point where it's just like, no, these are just animals we didn't understand, and y'all made a big mistake, and now you got to eat your shit. Will, it was so funny. I was complaining about something, and Will was like, well, all the people culpable for this need to die. And I was like, does Hammond die? And I was so excited about it.
What's kind of cool is you can spot sequences from The Lost World and from the third Jurassic Park that are in this one. So like the aviary and the stuff with the compies eating people comes from this book, even though they're later in later movies. That's the thing, is like the movies help by paring down how many dino scenes there are, because there are too many in this one. But
there is so many.
I will say I loved the raptors so much in the second half of this book. They're so badass.
I love the raptors, but I find the raptors are terrifying in like a serial killer way. But as far as like terrifying dino, the T-Rex just has it, man. That first scene with the T-Rex is just... mwah.
All right, guys, here's what I'm going to do. I have this power. I'm going to put up a poll in the chat. Also, you guys are going to disregard the fact that I have no idea how to spell Velociraptor.
Miss Alice, no. I do not know if I said that. I apologize. I could barely finish the movie for Timeline, whereas Jurassic Park movie was foundational to my childhood. I've never seen Timeline. I've never heard of it, but Jurassic Park was pretty great to watch as a kid. I recently watched it. My mom's just got a new puppy, and he had those like sharp-ass baby teeth, and so I called him Velociraptor all the time, and so then my mom was like, let's watch Jurassic Park. So literally like 3 weeks ago, I watched Jurassic Park, which was actually great.
Funny. Like 4 months ago, me and my family watched Jurassic Park, and I got to tell my mom about how that movie traumatized me so much as a child. Not just from the moment, like that movie is such a horror movie to me in certain ways. Even parts of it that don't have to do with the dinosaurs feel claustrophobic and like humid, and I don't like it, and I'm scared. The other thing I think the movie does that's interesting is there's a real sense of wonder about the dinosaurs that the movie encapsulates. And Hammond especially, and the book is not here for that.
That was the biggest thing when I first started reading this book, and guys, let me know if you felt the same. Where when I started reading this book, I was surprised how that wonder and like sense of exhilaration and like there was a beauty to the dinosaurs. There was a beauty to the way they like first beheld them and like when they found out about them. And in the book, it was way more clinical. Like, and it felt much more like, here's a recording of these events that happened in this like weird thing, and then you just so happen to pop into some people's brains while it happened.
I think that's done on purpose, really, by Crichton, because Crichton specializes essentially in taking ridiculous ideas and writing them in the flattest, most realistic way possible. And so there is supposed to be, I think, a very specific sense of undramatized, I don't know what the word is, but a very flat sense of the emotion of everything that's going on that is undramatic.
Yes, undramatic. We'll use that.
But we should probably jump into the plot a little bit in terms of if you don't, I don't think it's really worth going through the whole thing.
No, it is not. There's so much. Oh my God.
And also, most people have watched the movie or at least kind of know that it's dinosaurs are in a park and they break out.
Man, I really lost. I'm the only person that voted for Tiny Arms. Everybody else voted for Raptor. Jeez. Okay, thanks, guys.
The thing about it, and here's the thing, is that to me there was not a sense of size for the T-Rex, in that I don't have any like images of him in my brain scarred in for like how large and scary he was. Whereas for the Raptors, you get real senses for their savagery and speed and cunning.
They're scary in like a serial killer way, like that, like intelligent. What are they gonna do now? Like an alien. They give me like alien terror vibes, where the T-Rex gives me like this primordial, just the giant beast in the jungle thing, like that the thing that rustles behind the like you're not hearing the velociraptors rustle behind the leaves. They're over there waiting for you to turn your back so they can attack. Like it's different types of.
We polled our chat members, so if you would like to be a chat member and get crucial input in the future, join our Patreon, guys. We had T-Rex versus Raptors. We have 5 votes, and the Raptors have 80%, and Tiny Arm T-Rex has 20%. So
That's me. I'm that 20%.
you're the
Thanks.
20% who did that.
I don't know, there is that like super primordial thing about the T-Rex where it's just terrifying in like its scale. And I still got that from the book, but Allie said, yeah, Book Grant is way more blasé, and he is. There is no excitement. I found that Ellie, Dr. Sadler, still had some of that like wonder, but like Grant really didn't. And it wasn't until like the end of the book that I really began to feel, like the beginning and then the very end of the book, that I began to feel his like passion for paleontology and like just these animals.
So the ending is very different to the ending in the movie, in that in the ending in the movie, when they get the power back on, they get off the island essentially, and then the dinosaurs are free. In the book, they decide to go and check up on a raptor nest to see how many there were there, and there's like a whole little action sequence there, and then they leave as the Costa Rican army just blows up the entire island. And on the one hand, I really understand why the movie cut it that way, because there is a sense of like, why is this story still going? It's very much over right now. But there really was a sense of tragedy built in that last like half hour of the audiobook, or however much of it is in the actual book, of like, oh, these are animals. We don't really know who they are or what they are, and now they're all dead.
It really was very harrowing.
Allie, who says, as a kid, I was afraid of velociraptors hiding in my closet. Let me tell you a fun story. This movie came out, and I was born in 1990, so I was real young. I think I was like 3 or 4. Yeah, I'm old, I know. And my mother likes to tell the story about how she was like, do you want to watch this movie? And I was like, yes. And she was like, it's really scary. I don't think you can watch it. And I said, I still want to watch it. And so I would watch it, but at all the parts of the velociraptors, she would try to cover my eyes so I couldn't see. And then I would just keep putting her hands down. I was terrified of the velociraptors. Terrified of them for months afterwards in the dark. So yeah, I feel you, girl. You were saying, Maria?
Yes, before I was so rudely interrupted by my co-host.
Childhood trauma. It's important.
I don't know. I don't remember I remember being scared, but again, the T-Rex scene, the kitchen scene with the velociraptors in the movie really got me, especially that one part where they're like trying to close the hatch and then the velociraptor runs into the thing. I just watched this movie recently. There is going to be a fundamental difference of opinion between Will and I when it comes to Dr. Ian Malcolm, where I feel a lot of what he says, and Will not that he doesn't feel what he says, but Will finds him preachy and annoying.
Malcolm, for those who may have only watched the movie, not our wonderful patrons who picked us for this, Malcolm in the movie is Jeff Goldblum. And what I said is that he is so much more likable when he is played by Jeff Goldblum than in the book, where he is just a dick all the time. And the funny thing is, I think Chrichton writes him that way a little on purpose, like, oh, he's a dick, but also he wants Malcolm to be his mouthpiece about like chaos theory and large systems breaking down and science. And, you know, we've talked before on this podcast about how I have a very low tolerance for authors preaching at me.
Or, like, if he can tell what the author wants him to think.
And in this case, Crichton just tells you exactly what he's thinking about the things that are going on.
Thank you, Ice Willow. I love Malcolm. I'm here for Malcolm. Because the thing is, I have a lot of anxieties about how we function as a human society. I have 2 friends of mine got their doctorates in philosophy, and the one wrote his dissertation on environmental philosophy and how our current philosophical paradigms are not functioning in a way that it's going to be a benefit to us, but the planet will probably be fine. And so I have a lot of those anxieties about how we treat the planet, about how we approach, we can do it, so let's do it, instead of we could do it, but should we? And I'm very much a should we person.
You know what's fascinating is it's especially relevant now with social media companies. And that's one of the things about Jurassic Park that goes the book versus the movie, that goes a little unrecognized, is he was talking about things that were not going to crop up for a while. Again, this was published in 1990. This is 32 years ago at this point. But one of the problems with social media companies, and in general the app revolution and the disruption revolution, is that they think because they can do a thing, it's good to do a thing, or because it's a complicated thing, they understand it. So Uber can disrupt the taxi industry, but is that really good? A lot of the problems with social media companies in terms of we have an algorithm that drives engagement, but is that actually getting us good outcomes? Jan Elfson had this great line in his Chrichton video, his NFT crypto video, which is a 2-hour video essay that I've watched 6 times, about how Programmers tend to think and Silicon Valley types in general think because they understand one complex system, they can understand all complex systems, and it's not really true. And they also tend to have a view of sort of manifest destiny with technology and research, in that advancement is always good, and you always kind of get good outcomes from advancing, when that's not really true. It needs to be guided in a very specific way. And so that's something that Jurassic Park touches on a lot. And actually, a lot of Crichton's work tends to touch on, because he was very critical of science, and almost all of his books are like science thrillers in that way, which I thought was interesting.
Allie agrees with you. I kind of wanted Book Malcolm to get eaten.
Thank you.
I'm with Ice Willow. I could understand him being pissed because he told him, and I'd be preachy too. Me too. Absolutely. If anyone in this like lifetime tried to make a Jurassic Park, I would be like, why? I think Malcolm had a point for sure, but his attitude just got old.
And that's the thing is in terms of relative space in the book and the movie, Malcolm talks so much more in the book than he does in the movie. In the movie, he just is like kind of twitchy. They also have him be kind of just more of a likable character. One other thing I thought was really interesting about the book, which we don't really understand now, is part of what makes the park fail is automation, which in 1990, people did not understand as well as the problems with automation now. And again, it's something that we see actually a lot of commonly, in that a lot of, like, it's notoriously hard to get in contact with anyone at YouTube or Google because so many of their systems are automated. Their algorithms are automated because these large companies, to go on a tangent for a moment, are not profitable for like 10 to 20 years. They're just run off of basically hopes and vibes. They have to keep their operating costs as low as possible. And so automation is absolutely necessary in terms of like content moderation. They really should, all of these companies should be paying for a team of humans to do this, and none of them do, to support these massive institutions like YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and, well, not TikTok, but like Twitter, Instagram and all that. You need to have a huge amount of automated tools. And as the book shows, this can lead to people getting eaten by dinosaurs.
Who knew? Okay, so let's get into it. I'm not going to run through the whole plot like I normally do, just because there's so much of it, and there's so many like, are you in a building? Are you lost in the forest? Have you gotten to a new building? Are you lost in the forest again? Are we inside? There's a lot. But the basic gist of it is this book starts with kind of like a prologue that says when genetic science became a thing and you could start like cloning or messing with things, it became a monetary venture because science for the sake of science wasn't really here to super push, and there was a lot of like barriers you had to get through, where if you were doing it just for profit.
Allie says, in a 22 total reboot of Jurassic Park, park security would be tied to Alexa, and everyone would just accept a few dino nom-noms as part of the course. You know what's sad? 1,000%. It would just be viewed as like, that kind of happens sometimes with technology. That's an acceptable error risk.
But nobody stopped to think, like, should we be doing this? And then he starts talking about the companies that started doing like genetic science stuff for profit, one of which was called InGen. And he kind of takes you down the rabbit hole. And basically, he's like, then this thing happened on an island off the coast of Costa Rica. Nobody's really sure how it got to that point, but we're going to look at it. And then you start getting different points of views. And I really loved the beginning portion of this book. There was such a fantastic terror where all these different people were building what was happening together.
And there's like one-off characters who you don't see ever again. Like there's a medic who just sees like a weird animal wound on something they say was hit by like a scythe machine or something like that.
And so you get a bunch of, in the beginning, a bunch of these characters who, like Will said, never show up again, and that are just interacting with things that they don't know what it is. One of my favorites was family going to the beach, and the girl is attacked by
compies, which are like little dinosaurs.
If you've seen the second Jurassic Park movie, it's those little dinosaurs that like eat the girl on the beach. She has to see a doctor. She draws the thing. People can't tell what it is. They contact a scientist at Columbia. He's out of town, so they contact the infectious disease department. They're like, no, this looks fine, because they didn't test the saliva. And then one lady's like, oh, that's a tech is like, that's a dinosaur. My son likes those. And then suddenly you get all the way from all of these different people with all these tiny little pieces. And you're sitting there like, guys, it's dinosaurs. Just put it together. Just please. I need you all to talk. Like, so much of this could have been handled if you just talked instead of just sending each other things and not saying shit to each other. Just
what I liked about it is that even though you know that's what it is, and the reason it's okay not to have characters who come in again is you're following like the thread of the mystery from one spot to another spot, trying to track like the saliva they're trying to figure out what it is and stuff. And like it's so effectively written. Crichton is just an extremely talented writer in that respect.
This was one of the strongest parts, especially like the part with the midwife and the baby.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god, that was flippin' terrifying. She comes, there's this midwife, and babies have just been getting like bites taken out of them all over the island for a while. And she's like, do, I hear a bird hooting. And like from then on, for the rest of the book, you hear something hooted and you're like, it's a dinosaur, you're gonna get eaten. Like for the rest of the movie, like hoot is not good. And she comes in and they're literally eating the baby's face.
You know which part really hit me hard? When Nedry got his head crushed. Just something I can just imagine. He said he felt the pressure on either side of his head. Something with that stuck with me. It's not exactly Paul Doré on a tree, but like something about it really hit me.
That scene was way worse for me. A crow dive bombed my car while I listened to it. Shelby, I'm so sorry. You know what scene got me? We're doing such a bad job going in order. Well.
Again, the thing is, everyone knows the plot more or less, so it's more interesting to.
Yeah. Oh, I guess here's a question: what death affected you the most?
Ice Willow is in and Shelby is in, so those are the only two people.
No, Allie is in, not Ice Willow.
Oh, Miss Allie Snow. Okay, yeah.
Oh, it's Miss Allie Snow. Oh my god, I thought it was.
I don't know why I thought it was that either, but yeah, it is.
I'm sorry, that was the dumbest thing I've done in such a long time. Allie, I'm so sorry for butchering.
Have you really been thinking it's Ice Willow this whole time?
No, it's earlier I tried to say, I thought it was one word.
Ms. Ali Snow.
And I pronounced it really badly. I didn't even figure it out, Allie. He just went, Miss Allie Snow, and I went, oh, it's 3 words.
Ms. Ali Snow.
And I was like, because I almost said Melissa, and then I was like, wait, it's not Melissa.
If we lose another Patreon, we know why, Maria.
I'm sorry, Allie. Forgive me. Oh, that was too funny. That was a good laugh. So, guys, all three of you, what was the death that affected you the most? And was there a death that you went, yeah, you kind of deserved that?
You go first, Maria.
The one that I thought was deserved was kind of Hammond. Like, I was really waiting for that guy to, like, and did it for me, that part where he was like, Arnold wasn't good for this job. And Wu wasn't the right man for the job. He was trying to improve the dinosaurs instead of just giving us dinosaurs. And I'm like, no, Wu had the right idea. Make tame, docile, slow dinosaurs. If you're gonna do this, make them as undinosaurish as possible. Oh, the one I remember the best was Hammond, because I wasn't expecting it after the movie, but it really deserved it.
It's also good because it's just like he's a limping animal, and these are these animals doing what they normally do, and so he's just part of the chain and like not above it like he always thought.
It also was just really great because I loved that idea of it being like their saliva just making you relaxed and chill, and then like they start to eat him alive. For me, Henry Wu was really like, he got me.
I didn't expect him to die.
I did not expect him to die, and I think that's why it got me. And it was so gruesome, and it was one of the most gruesome. Like, it was like, and then they started eating his insides.
Yes, that's the other. They rip it open, and he's like, oh man, the velociraptors are badass.
And he's still like trying to, as they're eating his intestines, he's trying to limply move their head away. Like, his death was very affecting to me, especially because it just happened so fast. And I thought it was going to be Ellie. I thought it was going to be Dr. Sadler, because like I immediately knew, the two on the roof are going. They're going to get her. And then it was Wu. Shelby says, Hammond's death was a mixed bag for me. I was sad because I still pictured Richard Attenborough, but he was a mustache-twirling villain with dollar signs in his eyes. Get him. Yeah. Malcolm made me sad because it were just a little more competent. He didn't need to die.
What's interesting is Malcolm dies just from a leg injury. It's not even a dinosaur biting him, I think he just fell off.
No. It was...
Was it the T-Rex his leg is crushed, I thought.
Yeah, but he got bit somewhere. And I think there was an infection happening. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think the dinosaur bite is what killed him. I think it's the infection in his leg.
Yeah, which is again kind of poetic in terms of his whole chaos theory thing. But yeah, I had forgotten he died. I actually kind of liked that as an end for him more in terms of there's a tragedy or a poeticness to it in certain
100%.
And then he comes back in the sequel with a limp, but we won't talk about that.
That makes no sense. Once I read that, after I read the ending of this, I was like, I'm done.
Lost World, I've read it, though I read it again like 15 to 20 years ago. It's not as good. It basically just rehashes a lot of the same themes, which is probably why he didn't really want to write it. It's not really interesting. It's just talking about how the dinosaurs are really chimeric creatures, less than dinosaurs in an authentic sense. That's something I wish they would have talked about a little bit more in the movies, especially if you're going to make 19 of them, is that the dinosaurs, like everybody complains about, like, why doesn't Jurassic Park dinosaurs have feathers? And first of all, because they're not roosters. Oh, that's a thing you guys don't know, but me and Maria need to bring pistolas because she is a fan of feathers on dinosaurs, and I
love the way they look. Ah, man, I think they look fantastic.
I want my two-legged death monster dragons.
I think they're beautiful and terrifying. I'm here for bird dinosaurs, man.
No, bird dinosaurs are the worst. They always look really stupid. But anyway, my point was that I really wish somebody in one of the books would have, or one of the movies would just be like, yeah, look, we didn't think they had feathers. These aren't actual dinosaurs. They're representations of what we thought dinosaurs were at that time.
I like the look of the feathers. The first time I saw a feathered dinosaur, I was like, ooh, you beautiful. They look like drag queens. They do.
That's very accurate and explains my attitude versus your attitude on them.
Like, they're fabulous. Like, slay with your talons, queen.
There's an interesting book. I don't remember what it's called. I think it's called All Your Yesterdays or something like that. But anyway, it talks about how we always imagine dinosaurs as extremely skeletal, even though basically what it is, it took certain modern day animals and it recreated them based off of their skeleton. In the same way that if you were to reconstruct a dinosaur skull, you would reconstruct an animal. And they're like, hippos are these vicious predators with these massive fangs and they look like skulls. And it's because scientists don't want to theorize on extra things than, they don't want to go off the board and be like, oh, they had crests or anything when we don't really know if they did or not. But a lot of animals have features that you would not get from the bones. And so one of the reasons they don't have, like, dinosaurs never have lips is just because you don't have bones of that. But it's pretty ridiculous to think none of them had like lips or feathers or like weird wattles, for example.
And the cartilage bits.
Right. And so that's why they always look so skeletal and mean. But I want my serial killer death dinos.
Like I said in the beginning, the very first little section, it's just a bunch of disparate, like...
I'm sorry. I just saw the one where Allie said, feathers say I'm here for ballroom dance, not
carnage.
That's really funny.
They slay on and off the dance floor. I would be a feathered dinosaur.
You would.
I would be a fantastically feathered dinosaur. Anyway, the book. So it's kind of chunked up into different sections, and they're separated by like iterations of what the park, like there's little bits of Malcolm coming in and saying things based on the different iterations he's run of his.
Okay, so we should say Malcolm talks a lot about chaos theory, which is that small variations can lead to extremely complex systems. The example he gives is like, butterfly effect type of a thing, and that you can't ever really control large systems because of that, and they're inherently unstable. And specifically, he had written a report back when Jurassic Park was first being like researched or whatever, saying, okay, this is why if it fails, it's going to fail. Or probably he just said, you're all dicks and this is going to fail and I'm awesome, because that's a very him thing. But the chapters are all kind of preceded by little snippets from that report talking about, all right, control is now begun to dissipate. Now you're not going to be able to get it back and so forth.
After the beginning portion, which is all those like people who aren't putting the thing together, you end up going to Dr. Grant and Dr. Sadler, who, like in the movie, he's a paleontologist and she's a botanist. Like she studies ancient plants. They're on a dig and they end up getting contacted by not Hammond, but like some guy from, I don't know, some science bureau. Who's
the EPA.
Like, Hammond's doing some shady stuff and we don't know why. He's collecting a lot of amber. He's bought all the world's surplus amber and he bought an island. What is he doing? And they're like, I don't know. What could he be doing? And then Hammond comes by and is like, hey guys, take a little trip down to my island. I'd like you to come. I'll pay for your stuff. And it's a lot less celebratory than it is in the movie when it first happens. There was a sense of doom building in the first chapters with all those informations. And then this part, like getting to the island, felt like a little bit of a dip in the tension building, because like, okay, and then they were on the helicopter, and then they had to take a boat to this place, and it was a weird, like, long tangent to go on about the traveling, and it really, for me, broke the tension a skosh. Then they get to the island, and you learn that, so there's two characters in the book that got mushed in the movie, and one is, the press secretary whose name I've forgotten, and then Gennaro, who is Hammond's lawyer and who is representing all of his
investors.
The press secretary is, he dies pretty quick.
I like that he was painted as quite a nice guy until he abandons the kids in the car when he just panics.
Oh, his death was good too.
Yeah, his death is actually pretty nasty too. What it is Crichton, it helps with the very sort of flat, undramatic telling of things that feel a little more realistic, which helps the book as a whole. And that, like, this is a nice guy, but in a panic, he can't keep himself calm, and he runs away from little children and a dinosaur.
His death has a beautiful build of tension. There's this, this was one of the most horrific things that happened in the entire flipping book. This dude wakes up, he's fallen down the side of this hill, and he's just sitting there because he feels super anxious because he abandoned the kids. Are the kids dead? Is everybody dead? Did I just abandon kids to die? And he's just sitting there. And then he's like, wow, my lips are kind of numb. And then he touches the side of his face, and all you get at first is it's a giant, like, his face is swollen, but he can't feel what he's touching. And then he realizes it's a giant leech halfway in it, almost in his mouth, and he has to rip it. Crichton, you monster.
And that's just Costa Rica. That's not dinosaurs.
That was terrifying.
I like that when you said this was a terrifying scene, Shelby immediately was like, leeches.
Yes, because it was terrible.
They're awful. He also dies because the mini T-Rex, like, plays with him, which I thought was awful.
It is awful because, like, he ran from the big T-Rex, and then he ends up getting played with to death by the mini T-Rex, like the baby, the juvenile. And it's just, I also realized there's no point, I don't think we should do the plot of this. I think the important things to focus on is how this book is interested in logistics and the logistics of the downfall. So you get in the beginning a lot of the logistics of how the park works, how it runs, a lot of explanation about the thoughts that went into creating the dinosaurs and everything. And then in the second half, you get a beautiful, like, logistical failure and how the park falls into chaos, because the logistics are still at the heart of this. And what I mean by that is you get, like, Arnold in the beginning talking about the systems and how the park runs and everything, and you spend time in his head and how he thinks everything is pretty stable. But what fucks Arnold up and fucks up a lot of stuff for the book is the fact that when he turned the power on again, the way the park is designed is that if you turn the main power off, when it comes back on, the auxiliary power is going to come on first because you need a massive amount of power to turn the main power on. Once the auxiliary power comes on, you need to then turn the main system on, and then the auxiliary will stop running. After, like, trial and tribulation of Arnold turning off the main power, turning it back on, he just forgets.
Everything turns on and he's like, oh, okay, main power is back.
It's this instance of human error, just pure human error, because once the auxiliary power came back on, none of the fences went back on, and everybody thought they had, because again, everybody thought the main power was back on. And it's this beautiful, like, perfect example of what, like, Malcolm was talking about. And again, yes, could he have been less preachy? Yeah, sure. I get why it would be an issue, but it was just such a beautiful example of, like, this wasn't even the dinosaurs going crazy. This wasn't even the automated systems going crazy. Arnold just fucking forgot.
Well, the point that Malcolm makes at one point, again, the thing is, Malcolm is right about all of these things, even though I actually think in the end he's a little harsh on the park, but whatever, we'll get to that.
Yes.
One of the things is that the way they check the dinosaurs is they type into the computer how many they type in a number to make sure that there are, like, there's supposed to be 281 dinosaurs, and they tap in, do you see 281 dinosaurs? And the computer goes, yes.
232. That's the number they think it should be.
But the thing is, the computer is not telling them how many dinosaurs are there total. It's just telling them, hey, are you finding this amount? And the computer is always like, yes. And so when the designer is the coder is there, Nedry, and they're like, wait, why is it doing that? He's like, it's designed to do that. It's not designed to tell you how many there are total. It's just designed to tell you how many are there, as many as you're searching for. And so it goes back to what Malcolm says about people inheriting systems that they don't fully understand. So he talks about how, like, by the time you become a kung fu master, you have the discipline of having to learn to become a kung fu master, whereas with science you can simply it's like inherited wealth, I think is what he says, and that you didn't have to earn it, and so you have none of the personality and maturity that comes with having to earn it, which I don't I when I was a kid I loved that line, but as I gotten older I don't totally think that's true. Like, kung fu masters can just be kind of weird and violent. Like, I don't think it's as true as he likes to say, but in this case it's an example of people not understanding the underlying systems that they are trying to control.
I think it shouldn't be a blanket statement, but I think the idea that training and earning the power can make you more cautious about it, versus just like if you just are handed the power, you're more likely to be, because you're right, it's not a blanket statement at all.
Allie says, a lot of things that went wrong with the park would have still gone wrong if it was just a poorly managed regular zoo with regular deadly animals. So, yes. Okay, hilariously this morning I was reading on Twitter. I was just going through Twitter because that's my life. And not even related to this book, but I was reading a thread about how gorillas keep getting out of parks and people don't actually really know how to stop them. Like, they're extremely good at escaping zoos, and because they are both smart, nimble in terms of having hands and manipulable arms and stuff, and they're also insanely strong compared to almost every other animal, they just keep getting out of their enclosures. But in their case, they mostly just go to the zoo restaurant and like eat whatever's there, and then they get tranquilized and go back. And in general, they're just pretty chill about the whole thing. But it's funny because even in real life, people cannot keep animals from escaping from places. You know, it's extremely difficult. And so that's why I think Malcolm's like, you guys are super evil for not thinking of this stuff, was like maybe a little bit overly.
Ooh, Shelby had a great question. She said, I had a question about all the computer parts at the end. In the physical copy, it's a lot of graph and visuals. Does the audiobook read it all out to you or skip it? I don't know.
I actually noticed this while I was listening. It does read out a large portion of them to you, because like when it's reading a directory, it'll just say like 5 directory things, and this is a heat of the moment, like dinosaurs are about to kill, and you're like, why are you explaining all of this to me? It's interesting because I used to work at, my first job was at a nonprofit where we recorded books for the blind and dyslexic, like audiobook versions of textbooks. And one of the things you had to learn to do was to mark down visual graphs for the reader to be able to explain it to the listener. It's actually very hard to do with modern textbooks because they love having lots of little like pop-up things, and you got to like figure out which way they go. And so in this case, I think they did a good job balancing the tension versus the graph. So they don't stop to say like, oh, there is a graph showing whatever in the way you would with a textbook, but you get a good idea of like Tim trying to get through these systems.
Icefellow said, I hated how they talked about Nedry. I don't think they had to keep pointing out he was fat when they were calling him gross. Yes, thank you. It very much reminded me, what was that other book, Will?
The Savior's Champion.
Yeah, and that one dude, like, I hate, that is one of my pet peeves. Like, why we got to do it. Anyway, the look at logistics within this is really fascinating. And I think he does logistics, and at least for me, and this, guys, give me feedback, I didn't find the logistics explanations dry, and it's actually kind of magical that they weren't. You know, like, he managed to take something that should be very dry in textbook and made it, like, riveting. I was there to find out how things happened. And I think it's part of that kind of laconic style of his, where a lot of it is delivered to you in dialogue. So I think it was Shelby or Icewillow commented that there's literally a scene where 2 other characters are talking about Ian Malcolm's theories, and it's literally you getting info dumped to via a conversation with 2 characters who don't actually like his theories. But they said, like, I would have liked it if Malcolm was there to defend himself, but I actually like that he wasn't there, because it felt like a genuine conversation that 2 people who didn't necessarily respect this person would be having when one of them doesn't really know what chaos theory is. And so I think he has a really fantastic ability to like impart that.
I think there's 2 things. One is that he has a skill of writing that you see sometimes in science articles and sometimes not, and that certain people are good at writing them and some people
Shelby
aren't.
didn't like it.
The first thing is that, like, you know, you can be good at writing that way and not. I mentioned in our Q&A this nonfiction book called 1491 that was written by a journalist, and like he has a way of explaining relatively dry concepts really entertainingly and really well and just very clearly. I think the other thing with the book is that in this book, there is an underlying tension to all of the details, and that you're immediately starting to go, okay, how is this going to break? We know this is going to break at some point. So it's almost like a murder mystery. It's kind of like what I said at the end of The Detective's Tale, where it's like, in a mystery, info dumping is actually really good because there's attention to the information itself. Finding things out is interesting.
Ice Willow, she said, I think he's good at figuring out when peeps get bored and he lampshades it, which is, I think, exactly what Will was just talking about. like writing that line of how to keep it where it should be. But I can see why for some people it would be really like too much, or like 50-50 as far as their ability to like tune in and focus.
One example is at one point Sadler is talking about how these ferns in the park are poisonous. And then she goes on this diatribe about how like people don't understand that plants are like not just greenery background, they're a living part of the world. And I get it. It's part of the theme of the book and whatever. But I was like, okay, that specifically was like a page and a half of information we didn't need. So like sometimes, yes, it's interesting and important. And sometimes I feel like he just kind of wants to talk a little bit. I think it's also sort of a selection bias in terms of like, if you like reading science articles, you'll like the book. Whereas if you don't like reading science articles, it's just a thing in the book that, you know, we've talked before about how important it is to be kind of on the same page with the author in terms of like authors writing what they like to write. And so you can't necessarily fault them for that. And I think this is a case where like it has a very specific reader who likes science concepts.
It gave me a little bit of, because you're right, there is a bit of preachiness to this where like Crichton obviously has a way that he looks at the world. Again, I liked Malcolm partially because I am on that side of a lot of what he thinks, but I think there is a magic to what Max said about being able to hide the preachiness, because at moments this novel felt like an Ayn Rand novel where like suddenly a character's going on for pages at a time and you're like, this is the author telling me what he is thinking.
Especially Malcolm, when there's a dinosaur's gnawing at the skylight and he's going on for a page or two and you're like, no, there was raptors around. We got to deal with this.
In Ayn Rand, she does this thing, and he does it too through Hammond, where like there's always a part where like the villain goes on like an 8-page, just like in the one of our architecture, Fountainhead. In the Fountainhead, there's a trial, and the antagonist literally goes on for 8 pages giving the opposing view of the author / the other characters, and I literally was sitting there like, we couldn't have done this a little more subtly, my girl.
Was it about how like poor people should be fed and, you know, children shouldn't die? And knowing Ayn Rand, it's probably some basic human rights that she's railing against.
I read it. I think I was in 10th grade.
I was just joking. I hate Ayn Rand. I've never read.
I
read Anthem, which is like kind of dumb.
I think Anthem is like the middle school. She made a middle school, a high school, and a college level, and Fountainhead was the high school level, like literally consciously. I think Crichton could have done that better. If we want to talk about ways in which this book could have been improved, I think hiding the preach a bit and making it feel a bit more organic to the characters, because the problem with Malcolm is Malcolm starts out as a chaos theory mouthpiece, and that's it. Like, we don't get anything else about him, information about, like, what he does with his free time. Like, he feels like that. And I think that's why Jeff Goldblum was such a good choice for him, because Jeff Goldblum also has just this, like, charismatic vibe that the book version of Malcolm I don't think has. Especially because he's described as bald. But when you're, like, trying to make this guy a rock star, his initial description was just, like, bald white guy in black.
He reminded me of, and it wouldn't have been relevant in 1990, but the Apple guy, I forget his name.
Oh, Steve Jobs. Yes. And that's the thing. He gave me Steve Jobs vibes, which isn't to say that bald guys can't be like gorgeous rock stars. They absolutely can. It's just the entire description of him was more Steve Jobs than anything else.
Ms. Ali Snow said, I think the book is just so much about the ideas and message, and the actual characters were kind of secondary. That's a thing I noticed especially, is that everyone is really tamped down emotionally. People will get panicked and they will get mad, but there's not really like sadness really, or elation. They don't really pop off the page a lot. And again, that kind of helps with the tonal, everyone feels very realistic.
And that clinical.
It means that a lot of times he has to tell these themes not through the characters, but through the characters talking, which is a limitation I hadn't quite realized when I first read this when I was 13 or whatever. But it is a limitation in terms of how he writes. It makes, he's still extremely good, I should say, at like the emotion of like escaping velociraptors or outwitting them or all of that stuff.
That moment of hearing something that you're not sure what it is, that like he gets that terror so good. So like I'm gonna have things like, because I'm gonna launch into things we thought could have been better, because that's what we do. We analyze stuff.
We did that for a whole video. You guys should go check that out.
You should. Up there, it'll be in there, that corner, or maybe that one. I don't know.
Or maybe that one. I never actually linked the videos.
You never do. It's so annoying. I'll be like in something. We'll be here. And they're never there. Fucking hell, you lazy editor. But this book was like, I read this very quickly. I like gobble, guys. I enjoyed it. But there are things I definitely think could have been better. So Allie says the characters were kind of secondary, whereas in the movie, the fact that you do care about the characters pumps up the terror of the dino stuff, which I completely agree. Dr. Grant is way more compelling in the hands of, I forgot that actor's name. But again, because of his joy, like you get his genuine love of dinosaurs. Like that moment when he's on the like Triceratops and he's listening to her breathe.
Or even the first one of the Brontosaurus high in the sky. Or even though he's such a creepy looking dude and he scared me when I was a child, in the movie there is such a more sense of wonder. And that makes the horror of it later, I think, worse.
Sam Neill. Thank you, Shelby.
The lack of characterness of real like movement up and down of emotion in the characters makes it harder to care what happens to them. And if he wasn't such a talented thriller writer otherwise, I think the book would actually feel very inert and boring. It's just that he is quite good at like chase sequences and stuff. Yep. That I think makes it kind of work.
And that tension. He's fantastic when it comes to tension.
Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is because the characters all have to feel really clinical and realistic, you don't really get character growth. And so all of the if you want the character to say something, it can't be a personal revelation they found. It just has to be an opinion they already came in with. The characters are very static, even in Timeline, which does have some character growth, but you only notice from the beginning to the end. You don't quite notice in the middle as much. So it kind of takes away one of his tools to be able to discuss themes. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons it starts feeling preachy.
Shelby said, like, the movie characters actually have arcs, and, like, a really simple one is in Dr. Grant's character. He starts the movie not being into the idea of children. He doesn't like kids. He doesn't know how to connect to them. And by the end of them, like, he takes on some of their wonder, but that he had, like, he's able to share that wonder with him, but then, like, grow to be fond of them. And so you have that little baby character arc kind of going through, which is really nice.
Whereas in the book, he likes kids immediately.
Yeah, Hammond has more of a character arc where, like, he goes from, like, everything is great to being like, oh no, I done the fuck up.
Jeff Goldblum goes from having a shirt to not having a shirt.
That's the best character growth I've ever heard of, guys. But I do think the movie does win in that respect, and like Spielberg really hit that out of the park. The other thing, if we're talking about characters who are greatly improved from book to
Pistola's
movie.
time. Pistola time.
I hate Lexi. I hate Lex. Oh my god. Every time she did something where she was like, no, I want the thing. And she'd touch something and then people would be like, Lex, why did you do that? Or like, Lex, don't cough. And she's like, like.
All right. So for those who don't
me so much anxiety.
Understand who Maria's yelling at. In the movie, there is a kid and a boy child at like 9 or 10, and then an older girl who's like 13 or 14. In the book, she is a child. She's like, I don't know, 6 or 7, something like that. And that is who Maria is yelling at, a 6 or 7-year-old.
She has to be a little bit older because sometimes she says stuff that is just like, I don't know, but like, it's just...
I liked Lexi. I thought she was hilarious.
Is terrified, and because like here's the thing: if you have literally been attacked by a T-Rex, there should be like some shock, something that makes you like willing to listen.
She's hungry
to those. Yes. Do you know how many times this bitch was like, "I'm hungry"? Like literally, you're in a life or death situation. Don't say anything, Lex. I'm hungry. I want a hamburger. Like. Feed her to the dinosaurs, guys. Just throw her out.
Our patrons are also wrong because they're agreeing with Maria, saying that Lexi is all the worst. I would like to say Lexi is hilarious. She adds much needed levity to the book, and she's really funny. And I thought it was heartwarming, her and Timmy getting to work together.
No, I hate it. I hated it when she literally when he's looking at the window of stuff, and then she's like, I want to go to view, and she just clicks it, and he's like,
so funny.
No, it's not. She gave me so much anxiety, guys. I would rather be in a room with the T-Rex than Lexi.
I think what me and Maria realized is, as we said, I really like hot bitchy girls, and she's like a baby one in training in that she's got the bitchy part down.
Like she's preparing.
Yeah, she's preparing for when she's older. She's got the bitchy part down.
And so Allie says if they made her not annoying in the movie, Grant would never have changed his opinion about kids. But it's like, so they did two things. They scaled her up and they swapped some of her traits with Timmy. So Timmy is still super into dinosaurs, super idealizes Dr. Grant, but they gave his computer stuff to her and they made her just a little bit chiller. And she's also older. Now she does panic a little bit more than Timmy. She like you can tell that she like has like a panic attack.
I think they both panic pretty hard in that movie. That movie,
yeah, but
you know,
there's that whole part. There's that whole part where she's like shining the light, and he's like, "Turn it off! What are you doing?"
Yeah,
and she's
you're
just
right.
like frozen. And there's several scenes where Lexi is having a full on panic attack, because that's the thing. I'm fine with like panicking and acting out of anxiety in a moment. I'm fine with that. Just eat the candy bars, Lexi. Why the fuck do you need the ice cream? I thought you were hungry. Eat whatever is given to you, you whiny little.
They would not have been able to trap the Velociraptor in the refrigerator if they hadn't been looking for the ice cream. So actually, she saved both their lives.
She could have stuck to the hamburger thing, and he was like, you know what? We have pilots on. I'll make you the hamburger. Again, you could have had that scene without her being as annoying. Isolo says, it's such an unrealistic sibling relationship. She would have gotten punched if she had my brothers. It's just like, she legitimately would stress me out so badly when I was reading this that I was like, the best thing Spielberg did was change her character to the point where like, and I like that he gave her the like computer smarts at the end of the movie. Thank you, Spielberg, for making Lexi a better character. Here's a question I have for you guys. Will and I mentioned at the start that one of the things with this book is that there is too many scenes with dinosaur attacks or like coming into contact with dinosaurs. What scenes should have been cut for the sake of a tighter novel? So I'm asking you to put on your critical thinking writing caps.
I'm immediately going to go with the dive bombing pterosaurs, because it literally just happens and then they walk off and you're like, that was a really odd encounter.
And like, because it never comes back again. All the other dinosaurs come back.
He was literally just like, we have some really irritable pterosaurs. There's also a couple more hide and seek mouse moments with the T-Rex than are in the original, that are in the movie.
I think the whole raft thing could have been cut, to be honest. Like, which is what the movie did, but I think it would have made for a tighter book. Like, was the T-Rex coming up, trying to get them through the trees, and then having to go somewhere else terrifying? Yes. But did it need to be as long? No.
One thing I did think, and this is a thing they hadn't planned in the movie, they did, is that the T-Rex at the end of the movie, he comes back and he saves them, essentially, because he fights the raptors so they can run away, right? And I always thought that was a very clever move, because it ties in the T-Rex plot and the Velociraptor plot, which are actually separate plots, but they both have a meaning now. Whereas in the book, they actually don't. The T-Rex just kind of disappears after a while, and then the villain switches to the raptors. And it works because Mike Crichton is a very good action thriller writer, but it narratively doesn't make a lot of sense. They actually hadn't planned to do that in the movie. It was something they thought of while they were doing it, and they did it at the end. But it's, in terms of plot, it's much cleaner in that it doesn't seem off topic.
I also think there was too many trying to get into the sheds.
Into sheds, just in general.
When they have to get into the maintenance shed and turn the power on, 3 different people have to go, and 2, like, Arnold dies, Gennaro goes after, you think Gennaro's dead, and it just, like, again, and I'm talking, not that I didn't enjoy those scenes, but I did, but if we're looking at this from the kill your darlings, what's gotta go for the sake of a tighter novel, less shed stuff, guys.
The more I think about it, the more the movie really did make some smart decisions. Like Arnold, you don't figure out has failed until she finds his arm in there, and it's like a good tension and also cuts time. The whole clever girl thing with Muldoon is in the movie, but not in this, and that's such a great sequence. I did like Muldoon's accent more here, though. He had like a Dutch accent or something.
I liked Muldoon a lot as a character in this. He had this like run-down pragmaticism, like he knew what he was dealing with. He dealt with a lot of animals that you can't necessarily control, and I loved him being like, "Give me guns, Hammond," and Hammond like, "No." And then when Hammond was like yelling at him about stuff, he was like, "No. This is your fault. I asked for guns and now they're killing people. This is on you. Stew in it, motherfucker."
This reminds me of one big downgrade from book to movie, which is that in the book, they have a rocket launcher to deal with the T-Rex and the Raptors, which is hilarious and makes so much sense because, yeah, really large charging animals are extremely hard to stop with like normal bullets, much less a T-Rex. So he just has a rocket launcher. It's awesome. And he blows up one of the Raptors at one part and it just goes splat.
I liked Muldoon as a character so much more in the book. That is one thing that I will say, but I understand why they had to cut him a bit in the movie. There's so much stuff that happens in this. Like, people are in the control room for a long time, and then they're not in the control room, and then other people have to be in the control room, and then these people are in the lodge, and then these people are in the lodge, but then they go to the control room, and now these people aren't in the control room, and they're in the lodge. It reminds me of, I recently watched Star Wars Clone Wars, and in the last season 7, they have a 3-episode arc with these two sisters in Ahsoka. And they literally escape a jail, get taken back, escape the jail, get taken back, and then finally escape, and it ends. And like, you could have cut a lot of it. And this had that same vibe to me where like people are just like dashing back and forth across the map and like going back. And it just felt a little like too packed. We needed to cut.
You know what it is that thrillers really depend on being very tight. In terms of their plotting and stuff. And in general, this book has a little bit too much. Again, the whole river thing really doesn't need to happen. It's just kind of a plot cul-de-sac. And a lot of the info from the first half could probably be pared down. I think it goes back a little bit to what we were saying about the characters being fairly static and even in their temperament, in that none of these things really add up to any character development. In general, in a book or a movie, you want any plot that happens to affect the characters or add to the themes or like every plot point has to have a purpose beyond just pushing the plot forward. Whereas in this book, you don't really have that because there is no character development and people just say the themes very loudly. So like there is only the technical, how do we do this thing to get to that thing? And you don't really need, so the basic resetting up the park is the only thing you need. You don't need a longer cul-de-sac of we went up the river, but then we couldn't go up the river, so we had to go the other way.
Or like we got the power back on, and I get what he was doing because he was trying to play into that thing of you think you've gotten control back and then it's gone. But the whole like the park had power and then everybody forgot the auxiliary. Now granted, again, that's very realistic and that's one of my favorite parts, but it just kind of backsets the entire plot. We're like, okay, now we're back in that situation we were.
And the tension dies. I was surprised by that. The tension for me just fell off at that point, and then it has to build back up. But
what I will say is Crichton deserves accolades for the sheer fact that he can have all of this plot and he can lose tension, but he gets it back every time. Like, he gets back his tension. He spooks you a little bit. An example of this for me was the scene in the egg room with Grant. I liked that scene, but I will say I think the way the movie dealt with the velociraptors by having the T-Rex come in and like own them is more satisfying. But like that scene was just a fantastic, like him, and it also is him using his knowledge as a paleontologist to outsmart these incredibly successful killing machines. And I really enjoyed the whole sequence of it. But previously, like with the kitchen scene with the kids, way less tension. Like I knew immediately, oh, they're going to stuff him in the freezer. Like that scene did not have a ton of tension for me because I kind of knew where it was going. But the egg scene in the like nursery hatchery room was just really tense because I didn't know, because at this point I didn't know what this book like was. Were they going to kill Grant off? Because I had read the blurb like for the second book, so I knew Malcolm lived. So I thought Malcolm
which is ironic because he dies.
He died. this book was, I was like, wait, Malcolm's dead, but he was alive in the second book. So I didn't know if they were going to kill Grant. And so that had tension to me for it. So Allie said, agree about the pacing, and it just felt self-indulgent. Absolutely. Like again, it's one of those things, kill your darlings. You can't have, we were complaining in the, or I was complaining in the book talk chat thread Discord thing, with our patrons.
You're so good at technology.
I'm like an old lady, guys. But anyway, someone mentioned The Name of the Wind and An Old Man's Fear, and like I enjoy
Wise
the
Man's
writing
Fear.
of
I also
Wise
do
Man's
that
Fear.
all the time. For some reason.
I enjoy like the writing, and there are parts of those books I really like, but I find that there's just too many things. It felt like an idea that was built up over years, and all of these scenes and all of these things, and like nobody was like, hey, we don't need all of that. Like, you don't need an entire aside.
Those books work despite his plotting. Like, he is such a talented writer that those books work even a little bit is a testament to that. But otherwise,
Absolutely.
There's so much that's like, why does the sex fairy talk in with no capitalization? Like, why do we need 9 chapters of her? Why do we then need a discussion of how he still likes sex with normal women afterwards? Why do we go to Samurai Amazon Town afterward? Yeah, it's those books.
It's just, it has a lot. And this book has that same feel to me where like there are things that could have been cut for the benefit of the book, but Michael Crichton is also such a good writer that it still, like, it works despite itself.
It also works in the moment, I think, better than looking back.
Absolutely. Reading this book, I had way less issues than when I would stop and go, wait a minute. And again, I've mentioned before that Maria as a reader, especially if I've started the book enjoying it, I am much more willing to just go with the flow and accept as I'm reading what's happening. And it's only until I stop and think about it afterwards that I go, wait. Because I really, while I was reading this, was enjoying it. But then I would be like, how many Velociraptor scare scenes were there? How many T-Rex popping out of nowhere was there? And you're like, that's too many. Because like it makes me less likely to reread this book.
It reminds me a little bit of we would just finish the Kushil series, and I was talking about the sequel series, and I was like, I'm interested in what happens to the characters, but I don't want to dive through 800 pages to get through to those specific parts of it. So like rereading this, I would love to reread a shorter version of this that like didn't have so many things that didn't really go anywhere.
And do you know what I realized? I'm just going to watch the movie.
Yeah, that's good point. Good point.
That's what I'm going to do when I sit down. But the thing is, it sucks because I really loved the logistics. Like that entire, like in the beginning, learning how the park worked, seeing how the logistics failed. Like I loved all that. If we could just cut down the amount of dinosaur terror scenes there were, that I would love to, like, can someone make the ultimate abridged version of Jurassic Park, please? I would like to read it. But in the meantime, I'm just going to watch the movie because it really is, as far as storytelling, much tighter. And like there are scenes that are fantastic that you miss that they try like throw into other movies. But like the pterodactyl one, nah, we didn't need it.
Honestly, I kind of wish I remember his other work better because I'm kind of curious as to how much of a problem this is with his style, or is this a problem where as you grow as a writer, your editors get less control and you kind of just get to write whatever you want, and so they couldn't cut it as much, or is this something where like back then he needed to hit a certain word count and so he just wrote certain things? So I wish I was a little bit more aware of the sort of metatextual elements in that case to get a better idea of like, is this a decision he wanted or was thrust upon him?
And honestly, I enjoyed this enough that I would read more of his to get a better understanding. Because one of the things I've been thinking about doing for this channel, guys, though it would take a lot of time and effort, is like analyzing a writer's body, some of a writer's body of work to find like stylistic strengths, the weaknesses that you see when you read a bunch of their works, that it's not just specific to this book, but it kind of goes all the way through, and kind of doing a deep dive into authors to see like what is working, what isn't working, especially through the years and how their writing style develops. And I think Chrichton would be a really fascinating one to do.
We've essentially already done that with Naomi Novik. We've read you've read everything she's put out. I've read a lot of what she's put out, but I didn't finish.
Right.
I haven't read Uprooted, and I haven't read the last like 3 or 4 Tamara books.
Oh my God.
But you've read everything she's written, yeah. Let's see. In terms of his books, let me see, because I'm looking up his bibliography.
Allie also said the whole fairy side mission in A Wise Man's Fear killed the book for her. Yes.
Let's see. I've read The Andromeda Strain, which is quite good. Sphere I read, Jurassic Park, Lost World, Timeline, Prey. Actually, I haven't read a lot of his. Interesting.
He's very prolific. Again, I would not do all of his. I would pick like 6 from different periods to analyze.
Yeah. Timeline. So the thing is, you'll notice I like Timeline a lot, but it's really similar to this book in a lot of ways. Thing about science, corrupt guy trying to build parks, same kind of themes about science and capitalism. I wish he had gone a little harder against capitalism on this one, but I guess it was the 90s.
I was really looking for that like poo-poo on capitalism, and it really
he goes much harder against
on
science.
In the beginning, he talks about capitalism corrupting science, and then he just drops it and never touches it again. For the rest of the book, then it becomes we are mad at science specifically, not capitalism fueling science.
You know, that is a really funny thing, especially considering later Hammond starts talking about things we're doing that are ruining our planet, and those are all capitalism. And yet it's like, no, the thing that needs to be yelled at is science. Again, I don't think he's really wrong. I do think in general, I do think the book is a little harsh on like, oh man, you guys should have known this was going to fail. There's certain sort of almost metaphysical or religious aspects to Malcolm's. Yeah, there's almost a certain amount of religiosity to how Malcolm talks about chaos theory. And it's like, you and your hubris have defamed the god of chaos. And it's like,
one thing I will say, I would have liked if his chaos theory was presented more like clinically, like everything else was presented, because you're right, it is presented almost, and again, because he's the mouthpiece, like it's that Ayn Rand moment where like the screen goes up and it's not the Wizard of Oz, it's just Chrichton sitting there typing.
Because like the thing is, it's funny because at one point Arnold, I think, mentions that Malcolm is actually kind of dumb because, yeah, there's often many small things that will throw off a system, and then often those small things will also realign a system. So he uses the example of like rockets that like they'll become disaligned, but then they'll realign themselves because that's just how vibrations work or whatever. And so there's an extent, yeah, there's a religiosity to his criticism that I just find like kind of like, okay, but also one of the reasons that Jurassic Park failed is there was an active corporate espionage going on, an active corporate sabotage. And if that hadn't happened, then no, the park doesn't really fail.
And that's the thing is, I think his diatribe, because it becomes that at certain points, would have worked better if it hadn't been for the corporate espionage point, or if his thing that he was critiquing was capitalism, because then the corporate espionage and not being able to control a system and the wheels of capitalism, because that's literally what happens. You have a complex system. Capitalism got it.
And they're not paying. That was the other thing, is they're really trying to automate this park so it can run on 20 people when there's 232 dinosaurs. That's an insane amount of dinosaurs to have per people.
And also, for how much they're going to charge for people to come in, you could pay for like 500 employees.
Also, nowadays, again, you can not be profitable for about 20 years and still get billions. And what is it? Uber still isn't profitable, I think, is the hilarious part. But that's a little bit more of a dysfunctional culture that exists now versus back then of like disruption. Were there anything you guys in the chat really wanted us to talk about that we haven't covered? Because we do like to cater to you because you give us money.
You support us.
And as a reminder to everyone watching this afterwards in video form, you can join us on a Patreon where we have a book club where we do live streams and you guys get to pick the books. I really did like this book and I really liked rereading it.
Me too.
It was interesting to read it too as an older person than as a younger person, because again, I read this when I was like 13 or something insane. It really also makes me realize how good the movie is and how much it captures stuff that the book is about, even if the more technical side of stuff, which I agree with Maria, I just found really fascinating. Like I'm one of those people who will just sit and read a Wikipedia article for like 3 or 4 hours and go down like a Wikipedia spiral, rabbit hole. But those elements are really well written in this.
Max asks, can you tell that the prose felt dated? Weirdly enough, it felt like, so I mean, there was the moments where they were talking about like computers and what computers looked like and phones
CD-ROMs
and radios and CD-ROMs, and that made it feel dated, but it felt weirdly timely for me because a lot of the things that they're dealing with then are worse now, and so having this like catastrophic meltdown of a thing happen because like we got
the technology
and money, like we wanted to charge money to do the thing, felt very apt, and so like it felt weirdly like poignant, which was surprising. I wasn't expecting that because the movie kind of has this classic air to it, like it feels like terrifying but classic warm and comfy sweater. He writes so cleanly that it's hard to feel the like he's hard to place. Like I wouldn't read him and immediately place versus like some of the writers from like 80s and 70s sci-fi you can really place when you start reading them. But Crichton very much felt like clear of that. Like I wouldn't be able to. It's
the beginning of Timeline. I've actually reread several times because it's so sparse and clean, and you get such a good idea of the characters and the atmosphere, and it's a marvel how he does that. And in this one, I felt also he did it pretty effectively. You know, it's funny. When we were reading Truth of the Divine and Axiom's End, Crichton is who I'm always like, Lindsay Ellis doesn't write military people as well as Crichton does. Like this
You're
kind
right.
of clinical detachment is
You're
how I
right.
think those should be written. And like hers feel just like kind of childish in comparison.
So I do want to talk about that whole scene with the colony. There's this beautiful moment, and it speaks to, I think, what science is supposed to be versus what happened on the island. At the end, after they get the island in order and everything, the lawyer, Gennaro, is like, the military's going to come. They're going to want to blow everything up. We're good. Let's go. And Grant is like, no, we need to explore like how many, because at the heart of it is the dinosaurs aren't supposed to breed, but they find out, yes, they're doing a heckin' breed all over the place. And Grant is really determined to go in and see the Velociraptor nesting site. And I didn't understand, like I was kind of on Gennaro's side at first, where I was like, no, we don't, why we gotta investigate this, guys? But I think what it does, because they end up going, they find, they have a little baby velociraptor that Grant nearly killed that they release, and it leads them to his nesting ground, which is in this like volcanic swamp place. And they go into a tunnel and they go in, and it's just these like clusters of velociraptor familias with like juveniles and some very young babies running around. And there's this fascinating point where they're looking at them, and Dr. Sadler is like, are they standing in like a specific way? Like, is there like a way that they're laid out that's specific? And at first everybody's like, what are you talking about? But this is the part where you get that excitement for discovery, like where you feel Dr. Grant's excitement.
Well, and because in the beginning of the book, he's dealing with an egg colony that he's uncovering from the ground. And so like he's finally seeing it. Like this thing that he's been studying his whole life and getting to see it. They go in, they study it, and then all the velociraptors rush out of the back of the cave, and they follow them, and they end up on a beach. And they're all standing in a specific way, and they see like the matriarch velociraptor. But what they realize is they're looking in certain directions, and they're trying to get off the island. The velociraptors are actively looking for and tracking ships to get off the island because they want to migrate. And nobody had even thought about dinosaurs migrating prior to that point. And Grant has that moment where he has the eureka moment where he's looking at everything. He sees them see the boat, and he's like, oh, they're ready to migrate. They had their babies. They're ready. They'll come back, but they're ready. And you realize there's this whole, like, as much as they have an idea of what these dinosaurs that they created are, and like they've obviously for like 5 years been dealing with them, they don't know shit about them. There's been such a lack of scientific study with them. Because like Wu even says he would like play around with genetics and stuff, but he never stopped to think about how does that translate to behavior in the animals? What does that look like? What are the when he's playing around with things, what does that look like from a like their lives kind of thing? Crichton doesn't talk about this, but the end of this book very much gave me that science has been corrupted past the point of the joy of discovery and learning to learn, which again might not necessarily be a good thing, as Malcolm says, but has been corrupted for the sake, because none of the scientists, none of the specialists, none of the people on there were actually just looking at these animals going, what do you do? What's happening? What's going on in your brain right now? Like what are your life goals, dinos? Observation.
No one was observing them. And then this moment where they're finally being observed, a question that Grant has been sitting on for years is answered. And then the entire island is bombed and all the dinosaurs are killed.
The end of the book hit me much harder than I thought it would, because I mean, then they also are basically entrapped by the Costa Rican government after that for an indeterminate amount of time. They're not going to be able to leave, which, you know, worst places to be imprisoned. Yeah, it hit me really hard, like with this unsettling feeling, and there's like such a tragedy to these dinosaurs getting carpet bombed. And we figure out that's why they need to get onto the supply ships to leave and get onto the mainland, which some of the velociraptors probably have been. Yeah, I was surprised by that too. That hit me a lot harder than I thought it would. And it's a very good end. I can see why like the movie didn't go with it, you know, but because like it does, like literally right up until the end, I was like, okay, but why are we doing this weird cul-de-sac with the raptors at the end? Like,
exactly. I had that same thought, but it really connects into that, like, here are two scientists who have been studying these things for years, who genuinely just wanted to observe these creatures, and then they're destroyed. Like, these creatures that didn't ask to be brought back, you know, that can't migrate to the places that they used to migrate. Like, whatever place the velociraptors are trying to get to is probably not there, or if it is, it's probably a completely different climate. So where are you migrating to, my little babies? You don't know, and we as the reader don't. And it's just this, it really hit me. But that whole idea of like, and again, Crichton really doesn't talk about capitalism except in the beginning, fucking with science as much as that moment.
And then even then it's like, oh, look, it's kind of like these eccentric rich people sometimes. But also, how cool a sequel would it have been if it was like, okay, Muldoon has to go into the Costa Rican jungle to hunt down these last velociraptors.
That's what I thought it was gonna be. That is literally what it should have been, because I would have read, because that's what I thought. Like, when you finish the book, you think, okay, the logical next step is they have to get, and the reason they're holding Grant and Muldoon and everyone is because these are the people that now have the most knowledge of what these animals are like. And we need to go into the rainforests and track them down and get them. I'm kind of glad they didn't, because it had a weird tinge to like because there was this part where like the military was being really cagey and it was becoming a military operation. And I was like, if they make dinosaur weapons, I'm going to shoot myself. But I would have preferred that so much more to what the sequel sounds like it was going to be. Because like he set up what I like to call is a fertile ground to imagine what happened next with no intention of actually writing a sequel.
Yeah, that's
like
true.
he left you with this like
life has a way.
Yes, exactly. And then he was pressured into writing a sequel, and he was like, I'm just going to bypass that beautiful thing I set up because I don't want to ruin it, and we're just going to go to a weird other island.
It's actually funny that the Jurassic Park movies have taken so long to get to the idea of dinosaurs escaping into the wild. It took them until like movie, what is it, 5 or 6 to do that? Mm-hmm. And to be fair, it's also because like velociraptors are scary, but they're pretty much the only scary dinosaur that like would actually get out. All the other dinosaurs are pretty easy to deal with in the wild by like normal humans. So,
and also like a T-Rex would be really easy to take down from the air. They're so big. You could just take a helicopter and go pew pew pew.
That's how you shoot from helicopters. Pew pew
pew pew pew. Versus a velociraptor where they're hiding in trees. You can't get them.
Thank you everyone for joining us. This was actually a lot of fun. It was really fun to get your guys' ideas and talk back and forth with you while we were going through this. I really liked this book. I think also it would be fun to do more Crichton books in the future. Timeline, definitely, because that's fun. And then maybe one of his more sci-fi ones like The Andromeda Strain. Sphere is a little bit different. Sphere is like ampersand, but if ampersand weren't sexy.
I would be interested in doing that. Super thanks to all 4 of our patrons that showed up today. Thank you guys for talking with us. You're the best.
We will talk to all of you later. We love you, our parasocial
darlings. Bye.